After 15 years, a high school bully called me with a desperate request. At first, I didn't want to listen, but something made me pause. That decision left me questioning if people truly change, and if they deserve a chance. 15 years is a long time, but every now and then, the scars of high school sneak up on you when you least expect them. For me, it was on a rainy Tuesday morning, sandwiched between two meetings. I was sipping coffee in my apartment in Chicago, scrolling through emails on my laptop, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Message request from Kyle T. I paused. Kyle Thompson. I didn't need to check his profile to know who it was. You don't forget the name of the guy who made your teenage years miserable. He wasn't just a bully. He was the bully. I used to dread walking down the hallways at school because of him. He wasn't the kind of bully who relied on fists, though. His specialty was finding your weakest spot and cutting you down with a laugh, a word, or sometimes just a smirk. In my case, it was the way he never let me forget that I was poor little Joey from the crumbling house on Maple Street, wearing thrift store clothes. I thought I'd buried all of that. Chicago was my fresh start, a good job, a sleek one-bedroom apartment, the kind of life I never thought I'd have back in my hometown. But there he was, 15 years later, reaching out. I hesitated before clicking the message. What could Kyle possibly want? To apologize? To reminisce? Finally, I opened it. Hey Joey, the message read. It's been a long time. I hope you're doing well. I wouldn't reach out like this unless it was important, but I really need your help. My help? I read the message twice, trying to imagine what kind of situation could lead Kyle Thompson, the guy who used to trip me in the cafeteria and laugh as I spilled my tray, to come crawling to me for help. Against my better judgment, I replied. What's this about? The response came quickly, almost like he'd been waiting for me to answer. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Can we talk? Just a quick phone call. I leaned back in my chair, the message glaring at me like a challenge. Part of me wanted to ignore it, delete it, and move on with my life. But the other part, the one that still carried a flicker of resentment and curiosity, wanted to hear what he had to say. After a long moment, I typed, Fine, call me at 6. By 6 p.m., I had Kyle's name flashing on my phone screen. But before I tell you about that call, I should probably explain how I got to the place where a guy like Kyle Thompson would feel the need to come to me for help. High school wasn't exactly a highlight reel for me. Back then, I was the kid everyone saw but no one wanted to be. I was pudgy, awkward, and stuck with a haircut my mom insisted on doing herself in the kitchen. My wardrobe? Discount rack finds that screamed, clearance aisle chic. It didn't help that my family was scraping by. If the roof didn't leak and the power stayed on, we called it a good month. But everything changed after graduation. I don't know if it was spite, ambition, or sheer desperation, but the day I left that town, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let that version of me define the rest of my life. The first thing I did was tackle my weight. I'd never been the athletic type, but over that summer, I made a routine out of long walks and cutting out junk food. By the time I got to college, I wasn't a different person yet, but I wasn't the kid from Maple Street either. Then there was my hair. It's funny how something so small can make such a difference. I saved up for a real haircut, one done by someone who didn't double as a PTA mom. Suddenly, I looked presentable. I'd worked my way into a scholarship at a top state university, and that's where things really clicked. Surrounded by people with big dreams and bigger ideas, I started to see what was possible. I joined clubs, made friends, and, for the first time in my life, felt like I belonged. And then there was Mia. Mia wasn't just beautiful, though she was, in a way that made me feel like the luckiest guy on the planet. She was smart, driven, and completely out of my league. We met in a business class, where she immediately called me out for showing up late to a group project meeting. By the end of that semester, I'd worked up the nerve to ask her out, and somehow, she said yes. She believed in me in a way I didn't even believe in myself at first. When I told her I wanted to start a business, something small, just to see if I could, she didn't laugh or call it unrealistic. She asked me when I planned to start. That first business failed, miserably. But by the time I graduated, I'd launched another one, and it did well enough to land me an investor. From there, I built a career, consulting, managing, scaling up startups. The grind was relentless, but it paid off. Now, I was the guy who sat in corner offices and called the shots. The guy with an apartment in Chicago and a life I'd once thought was reserved for people on TV. Kyle Thompson? He wasn't even a footnote in my story anymore. Until today, at exactly 6 p.m., my phone lit up. For a second, I considered letting it ring out, maybe forcing Kyle to stew a little, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, "This is Josh." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "Hey, Joey. Josh, I mean." Kyle Thompson sounded smaller, not in volume, but in presence. Gone was the cocky drawl I remembered so well, the one that carried through the hallways like he owned them. This was someone else, a guy who seemed hesitant, almost unsure of himself. "It's been a while," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Yeah, it has," he said. Another awkward pause. "Listen, thanks for taking my call. I wasn't sure you'd even respond." "Neither was I admitted. "What's this about, Kyle?" There was a shuffle on the other end, like he was adjusting the phone or maybe fidgeting. "Okay, I'm just gonna say it," he began. "I'm in trouble, Josh. Financial trouble. And I need your help." I raised an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see me. "Help? From me? What kind of trouble?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "It's my dad's auto shop," he said. "You remember the place, right? Thompson Auto, down by the old train depot?" I did. His dad's shop had been a staple in town for years. I used to walk past it on my way to the library, envying how Kyle always seemed to have money from working there in the summers. "Sure, I remember," I said. "Well, things haven't been great," Kyle continued. "My dad's health went downhill a few years ago, and I've been running the shop since. But the last couple of years," he let out a bitter laugh. "Let's just say we've had a hard time keeping the lights on." I didn't say anything, waiting for him to get to the point. "We're behind on our mortgage," he said. "The bank's threatening to take the shop if we don't catch up. And if that happens," he trailed off. I could fill in the blanks. Losing the shop would mean losing his livelihood. For a guy like Kyle, stuck in the same small town he grew up in, that might as well be the end of the world. "Okay," I said slowly. "But what does this have to do with me?" There was another long pause. "I've seen your posts," Kyle admitted, "on social media, about your business and everything you've done. You're doing great, man. I thought maybe you could, I don't know, invest? Or loan me something to get back on my feet." I blinked. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd heard him right. "You're asking me for money?" "I know how it sounds," Kyle said quickly, "and I wouldn't ask if I didn't really need it. I wouldn't." His voice cracked slightly, like he was trying to hold on to whatever pride he had left. I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, trying to process the absurdity of this moment. The guy who'd once humiliated me for not being able to afford lunch was now coming to me with his hand out. "You do realize how ironic this is, right?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know," Kyle said quietly. "Believe me, I know. But I'm not that guy anymore, Josh. I swear. I've changed." I didn't know if I believed him. "I'm not asking for a handout," he added quickly. "I'm willing to work for it. Pay it back. Whatever it takes. Just please. You're my last shot." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, while Kyle's words hung in the air. "You're my last shot." I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the sheer audacity of it was overwhelming. This guy, Kyle Thompson, who'd once made me feel like dirt under his shoes, was now begging me for help. "Josh," he asked after a moment of silence, "you still there?" "I'm here," I said, my voice flat. "Just processing. The thing is, I wasn't the same person I'd been in high school. Not just on the outside, but on the inside too. Back then, I probably would have jumped at the chance to rub this in Kyle's face, to make him feel as small as he once made me feel. But now? Now, I wasn't so sure. "Look, Kyle," I said finally, "I'm sorry you're in a tough spot. Really, I am. But do you have any idea how this sounds? After everything you put me through in high school?" He sighed. "I know, Josh. Believe me, I know. And if I could take it all back, I would. I was an idiot back then. Mean, selfish, whatever word you want to use. I've thought about it a lot over the years. How I treated you. How I treated everyone. It sounded rehearsed, but there was something raw underneath it. Something that caught me off guard. I've changed, he continued. I swear. High school. It feels like a different life. But I get it. You don't owe me anything. Not after the way I treated you. I just thought maybe, if there was a chance. He cut himself off, letting the sentence dangle. I rubbed my temple, my thoughts spinning. The truth was, I could afford to help him. It wouldn't be a huge stretch for me to loan him the money he needed. But this wasn't about finances. It was about principle. Part of me wanted to say no out of sheer spite, to finally turn the tables on him after all these years. But another part, a quieter, more reasonable part, was asking a different question. What if he really has changed? If I said no, would I be any better than he was back then? Would holding on to that grudge help either of us? I don't know, Kyle, I said finally. I'm going to need some time to think about this. Of course, he said quickly. Take all the time you need. Just let me know, okay? Whatever you decide, I'll understand. After the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at my phone. My mind was a jumble of emotions. Anger, pity, confusion. Part of me wanted to call Mia and talk it through, but another part knew I needed to sort this out on my own. 15 years ago, Kyle Thompson had all the power. He was the popular kid, the golden boy. I was the easy target, the one no one believed in. Now, the roles were reversed, and I had to decide what to do with that power. After the call, I couldn't focus on anything else. I kept replaying Kyle's words in my head. His voice, his tone, the way he sounded desperate and defeated. It was so far from the Kyle Thompson I remembered that it almost didn't feel real. But the memories came flooding back anyway, raw and vivid, like I was 16 again and stuck in the halls of Jefferson High. Kyle wasn't your typical brute. He wasn't the guy who shoved you into lockers or stole your lunch money. He was smarter than that, and that made it worse. He was a master at finding your insecurities, the stuff you didn't want anyone to know, and dragging them into the spotlight. For me, it was my clothes. I didn't dress poorly because I wanted to. My mom did her best, but with 3 kids and a tight budget, thrift stores were all we could afford. Kyle zeroed in on that immediately. Nice sweater, Joey, he'd say, loud enough for everyone to hear. Didn't know the Salvation Army was having a sale. Or, that shirt's vintage, huh? From, like, the 1970s? Did your grandpa let you borrow it? It wasn't just the comments, though. He had a way of turning everyone else into accomplices. A little nudge here, a smirk there, and suddenly the whole class was laughing at my expense. And then there was gym class. I hated gym. It was the one place where there was no escaping Kyle, no fading into the background. He was a star athlete, always picked first for every team, while I was the last one standing, the kid no one wanted. Don't pass it to Joey, he'd shout during basketball games. He'll just trip over his own feet. It didn't matter how hard I tried. He made sure I looked like an idiot every time. But the worst was the cafeteria incident. I'd saved up for weeks to buy a pair of sneakers I desperately wanted. Nothing fancy, just something new that didn't scream, hand-me-down. The first day I wore them to school, Kyle noticed immediately. Look at Joey, he announced, standing on a table so the whole cafeteria could hear. He finally got new shoes. What did you do, rob a Payless? Then he accidentally stepped on them, smearing ketchup from his tray across the white fabric. I'd wanted to scream, to fight back, to do anything. But I just stood there, holding my tray, while everyone laughed. That was Kyle Thompson. He didn't just embarrass you. He made sure you stayed humiliated, long after the moment had passed. I shook my head, trying to push the memories away. That was a lifetime ago, I told myself. But even now, thinking about it made my chest tighten. So why was I even considering helping him? I'd spent years clawing my way out of the hole he'd put me in, losing weight, changing my style, building a life that couldn't be touched by the likes of Kyle Thompson. And now he wanted me to swoop in and save him? I wanted to say no. I wanted to slam the door on the past and move on. But another thought kept creeping in, unwelcome and persistent. What if this is my chance to be the better person? The next morning, I still hadn't made up my mind. My coffee sat untouched on the counter while I replayed old memories and Kyle's voice from the night before. It was a tug-of-war between past and present, anger, and something I didn't want to call forgiveness. I needed perspective, so I did what I should have done from the start. I called Mia. "Josh," she answered, her voice warm but groggy. I'd forgotten it was early for her. She was visiting her parents on the West Coast for the week. "What's going on?" "Sorry, did I wake you?" "It's fine," she said with a yawn. "What's up?" I hesitated, unsure where to start. "Do you remember me telling you about Kyle Thompson? From high school?" "The bully?" she asked, her voice sharpening. "The one who made your life hell?" "That's the one," I said. "What about him?" "He called me last night. Well, messaged me first, then called." There was a pause on her end. "What did he want?" "Help," I said, the word tasting strange in my mouth. "He's in financial trouble. His dad's auto shop is about to go under, and he's asking me for a loan." Mia let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's bold, right?" I said, laughing bitterly. "I mean, the guy tormented me for years, and now he wants me to bail him out?" "What did you tell him?" she asked. I said I'd think about it. That was all she said. Just I knew that tone. It meant she was thinking, which wasn't necessarily a good thing. "What?" I asked. "I'm just trying to figure out why you're even considering this," she said. "You don't owe him anything, Josh. If anyone deserves to hear a hard no, it's him." "I know," I said quickly, "and part of me wants to tell him to shove it. But what?" "But he sounded different," I admitted. "Like he wasn't just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. He sounded like, I don't know, like he was genuinely trying to be better." Mia didn't respond right away. I could almost hear her weighing her words. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's say he has changed. Does that mean you're obligated to help him?" "Because, personally, I don't think it does." "It's not about obligation," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "So what's it about?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Maybe it's about proving to myself that I'm better than he was. That I'm not the kind of person who kicks someone when they're down, even if they did it to me." "That's noble," she said carefully, "but it's also a lot to put on yourself. Helping him doesn't erase what he did. Just like holding a grudge doesn't make you weak. You don't need to prove anything to anyone." "I know," I said, even though I wasn't sure I did. "Look," she continued, her voice softening, "I can't tell you what to do, but whatever you decide, don't do it out of guilt. Do it because it's what you can live with." "Okay." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Okay." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank wall across from me. Mia was right. Whatever I decided, I had to be able to live with it. The question was, what would that decision be? I spent the rest of the day going back and forth. Every time I thought I'd made up my mind, another voice in my head would argue the opposite. I'd gone through all the angles, what Kyle did to me, how he sounded on the call, what Mia had said, but none of it made the choice any easier. By evening, I realized there was no perfect answer. All I could do was pick a path and live with it. So I picked up my phone and messaged Kyle. "Let's talk tomorrow at 2. I'll call you." The typing bubbles appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. After a minute, his reply came through. "Thanks, Josh. I really appreciate it." The next day, I sat down at my desk, laptop open, a notebook next to me. I'd written out a list of questions to ask Kyle. If I was going to consider helping him, I needed to understand the situation better. When I called, he picked up on the first ring. "Josh," he said, his voice calmer this time. "Hey, Kyle," I said. "So, I've thought about what you said, and I'm willing to hear you out. But if I'm going to help you, I need to know exactly what's going on. No half-truths, no vague answers." "Got it. Got it," he said quickly. "Okay," I said. "Let's start with the basics. How much money do you need?" 20,000, he said. I raised an eyebrow. That wasn't pocket change. And that would cover everything? I asked. "The mortgage, any debts?" "Yeah," he said. "The bank gave us an extension last month, but we're still short. If I can pay them back in full, we'll be in the clear." "Why not go to a bank for a loan?" "They won't approve me," he said, his voice dropping. "My credit's shot. I maxed out my cards trying to keep the shop afloat, and now it's all catching up to me. I scribbled a note in my notebook. Okay, what happens if the shop closes? Kyle sighed. I don't know. I'll probably have to sell what's left and try to find a job somewhere else. But there aren't exactly a lot of opportunities around here, you know? That part, I believed. Our hometown wasn't exactly booming. If you didn't work in the handful of small businesses or the factory on the outskirts of town, you were out of luck. Do you have a plan to turn things around? I asked. Because if I'm going to help you, I need to know this isn't just throwing money into a sinking ship. Yes, he said quickly. I've been working on that. I'm cutting costs, reaching out to old customers, trying to bring in new ones. I've even been offering discounts to local companies if they bring in their fleets for service. It's slow, but it's starting to pick up. He sounded genuine, hopeful, even, but I wasn't done. Kyle, I said, leaning back in my chair, why me? You could have asked anyone else, family, old friends, even one of those rich guys in town. Why come to me? There was a long pause. I could hear him take a deep breath before answering. Because I owe you, he said quietly, and not just because of how I treated you. I owe you because you're the only person I know who'd actually understand what it's like to struggle, to feel like you're drowning and no one's going to throw you a rope. You made it out, Josh. You're living proof it's possible. I guess. I thought if anyone would give me a shot, it'd be you. I didn't say anything. For the first time, he sounded like the guy I always wished he'd been back in high school. Not smug, not cruel, just honest. Look, he added, his voice firm now, if you say no, I'll get it. I'll figure something out. But if you say yes, I won't forget it. I closed my notebook and stared at the wall for a moment, the weight of his words settling over me. All right, I said finally. I'll help. But this isn't a gift. It's a loan. And we're going to write up an agreement with a payment plan. Understood? Understood, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Thank you, Josh. Really, you don't know what this means to me. I didn't reply right away, because I wasn't sure I knew what it meant to me either. Helping Kyle felt strange, like I'd opened a door to a part of my life I thought I'd locked away for good. I told myself I'd done the right thing, that offering him a loan wasn't about him. It was about me proving to myself that I wasn't stuck in the past. Still, as I transferred the money into his account a few days later, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. Are you sure about this? Mia had asked during one of our nightly calls. Not really, I admitted. But he's desperate, Mia. If the roles were reversed, I'd want someone to give me a chance. And if he doesn't pay you back? She asked. I'll survive, I said. I just have to trust him. It wasn't easy, though. Trust, after all, wasn't something Kyle and I had ever shared. A week later, I got my first update. Josh, Kyle said when he called, his voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. You have no idea how much of a difference this has made. The mortgage is caught up, and I've already had 2 new companies bring in their fleets this week. It's like things are finally turning around. That's good to hear, I said, keeping my tone even. Seriously, man. I don't know how to thank you, he added. I wanted to tell him to stop thanking me and start paying me back, but I bit my tongue. This wasn't about gratitude. It was about seeing if he could take this lifeline and actually build something out of it. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to notice something unexpected. Kyle called more often, not just to update me on the shop, but to actually talk. He'd tell me about new customers or funny stories from his day. Sometimes he'd even ask me for advice, which felt surreal coming from the guy who used to make me feel like an idiot for existing. I kept my guard up at first, wary that he was buttering me up to ask for more. But he never did. If anything, his calls felt genuine, like he actually cared about my opinion. One night, I asked him a question that had been nagging at me. Kyle, why didn't you ever apologize before all this? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said finally. I guess I figured you wouldn't want to hear it. Or maybe I didn't want to admit to myself how badly I screwed up back then. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to hold on to my anger, to remind him that an apology now didn't erase years of pain. But another part, a part one wasn't ready to name, felt something like closure. For the first time, it seemed like the person Kyle was trying to be might actually outweigh the person he used to be. The months passed, and something unexpected began to happen. I stopped thinking of Kyle as my old bully and started seeing him as just Kyle. Our calls became a regular thing, sometimes about the shop, sometimes about nothing at all. He told me about his daughter, Lily, a 7-year-old with his blonde hair but none of his arrogance. He talked about how she loved drawing and how he felt guilty he couldn't afford to send her to a better school. Lily keeps asking me if we can go to Disney World, he said one day, laughing. I told her maybe when the shop's doing better, but she's not buying it. She's already planning her outfit for the parade. Hearing him talk about Lily was a side of Kyle I'd never imagined existed. The confident, cruel teenager I remembered wouldn't have cared about anyone but himself. But this Kyle? He sounded like a guy who was trying his best. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Running the shop was a grind, and Kyle had moments where he doubted whether he could keep it up. One night, after a particularly tough week, he called sounding more frustrated than I'd ever heard him. Some days, I don't know why I bother, he said. I'm working 12-hour days, and it still feels like I'm barely keeping my head above water. Then why do you keep going? I asked. For Lily, he said without hesitation. She deserves better than this, better than I had. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. When we were kids, Kyle had been the guy who seemed untouchable. His dad owned a business, he was popular, and he had the kind of confidence I couldn't fake on my best day. But hearing him now, it was clear he'd spent the last 15 years fighting his own battles, ones I never saw. It made me wonder how much of the Kyle I hated back then was just a kid trying to hide his own insecurities. But the real shift came the day I visited the shop. It wasn't planned. I was back in town for a family thing and decided to swing by. I hadn't told Kyle I was coming. Part of me wasn't sure how I'd feel seeing him in person after all these years. When I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the place looked almost exactly like I remembered it. The same faded sign, the same grease-streaked windows. But inside, it was buzzing with activity. Kyle was in the middle of the shop, wiping his hands on a rag and laughing with a customer. He looked up, saw me, and froze for a second before breaking into a grin. Josh, he called out, walking over. What are you doing here? Just in town for a couple of days, I said. Thought I'd check out the place. He gave me a quick tour, proudly pointing out the new equipment he'd bought with the money he'd saved from his recent uptick in business. This is the guy who made it possible, he told one of his employees, clapping me on the shoulder. I laughed it off, but something about the moment stuck with me. For the first time, it felt like Kyle wasn't just grateful for the loan. He was grateful for a chance to prove to himself that he could turn his life around. On the drive back to Chicago, I couldn't stop thinking about the visit to Kyle's shop. Seeing him there, focused, determined, and genuinely thriving, left me with a feeling I hadn't expected. Pride. It wasn't the kind of pride that came from holding power over someone or being able to say, I told you so. It was quieter than that, more personal. Watching Kyle work to rebuild his life made me realize something important. People can change. Not always and not easily, but sometimes they do. The next few months flew by. Kyle stuck to the repayment plan we'd agreed on, sending me regular installments like clockwork. I didn't need the money, not really, but every payment felt like a small victory, proof that he was taking this seriously. One day, as I was looking over my bank account, I saw that he'd sent the final payment. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, and realized something. The loan wasn't what mattered. What mattered was what had come out of it. Kyle wasn't just paying back the money. He was paying back the years of hurt in the only way that mattered, by being better. A week later, I got another call from him. Hey Josh, he said. I just wanted to say thanks. For everything. I don't think I would have made it without your help. You would have figured it out, I said. I just gave you a nudge. He chuckled. Maybe, but either way, I owe you. Not just for the loan, but for giving me a second chance. You don't owe me anything, Kyle, I said. And for the first time, I meant it. That night, I thought about high school, about all the years I'd spent resenting Kyle and the power he seemed to hold over me. Helping him hadn't erased the past, but it had given me something I never thought I'd find: peace. I realized that the question I'd been wrestling with this whole time wasn't, does Kyle deserve my help? It was, who do I want to be? And now, I knew the answer. What would you do in a similar situation? Share your opinion in the comments.